So, there's a book that's been on my to-read list for quite some time. I mean, I have a million of those, but this one picks it up from the local bookstore on a whim, and I didn't think that it would hook me this much. Every time that I was starting to feel, I don't know, kind of misguided about where I was going in life, I thought, man, you should really read that book. It might help straighten you out. Unfortunately, it did not. It may have raised more questions than it answered, and it's an interesting roller coaster ride. It's one of the more important books that I've ever read. I can't say it's the best book that I've ever read. I can't even say that the writer is all that talented. Um, Artistically, I don't think he is, but he's a journalist. It's more or less that his ability to report the facts and to play detective is really amazing. And that's not to say that he can't write. He certainly can. I just don't think he goes up there next to whoever, William Faulkner. But John Krakauer's Into the Wild. There's a lot of history behind this book. This book represents a very interesting story about a very interesting person, and you could get by saying, you could definitely say it's a tragedy. I mean, I have seen YouTube videos concerning this. This guy gets onto a lot of top 15s, a lot of top 10, you know, mysterious blahs, a lot of, top 10 most gruesome blahs, but I don't think watching those videos paints an accurate picture. There's no way that those videos can contain the kind of information that this book has. I know that they made a movie about it. Maybe you've seen the movie, but even so, I highly recommend reading the book. I don't even know where to begin. Except for, I always knew, I'd always heard about the legend of the guy who was found in bus 142 on the Stampede Trail in Alaska, and I always thought he was a fucking hero. I know that he died, and I guess a lot of people, for some reason, look down on him for that. The book is pretty balanced. The book does not either cast him as a fool or a genius, but kind of both, which he probably was. But the thing is near the end, and there's a lot of commentary from boomers. The dude who wrote this is a boomer. He got to write for however many years for Outside Magazine, who sent him to Mount Everest. I'm literally reading his memoirs about Mount Everest now. And they try to judge this kid who disappeared into the Alaskan wilderness in 92. Or maybe he was found in 92, he disappeared in like 91. And there's a lot of input from, different boomers from Alaska who were interviewed who went, well, he's just... I don't want to go over the entire story. You need to pick this up and read this just to get a good understanding of where this kid came from, who his family was, what he was about, his mentality. All I can say is that, to some extent, I feel personally attacked by this content. Although our motivations are a little bit different. Chris McCandless, or Alexander Supertramp, whatever name you think that he should go by, his motivation for disappearing into the Alaskan wilderness, or really living his life as a tramp the years previous to that, the book kind of suggests that it's due to his strange, eccentric romanticism that was spurred on, ironically, by reading too much Tolstoy, the real one. I always thought he was a hero, though, because I dig the wilderness, and I, too, sometimes like to disappear into the wilderness, which is how this video is getting made. I do mine for sanity reasons. It feels nice to leave society behind. I was always kind of fascinated by the saying on the inside of the Jumanji board game, in the movie, when they flip it open and it says, Jumanji, a game for those who wish to leave the world behind. Yeah, who wouldn't want to leave the world behind sometimes? All these, part of what pisses me off is that a lot of the commentary from these, these baby boomers who either work in the Park Service or are, living in Alaska, they act like they just don't understand why this kid would want to disappear off of the beaten path and try to live off of his own resources out in the wild rather than playing the game of society. And I feel like that's like some kind of like severe mental retardation right there. That's like asking why there were slaves that ran off the plantations and joined up with the natives to become Creole.
I meant Seminole.
Like, well, why would they want to leave the plantation? They have back-breaking labor and no benefit from it. And maybe it wasn't as bad back then. And definitely the weird thing is his prospects were better. I mean, this was the early 90s, so he was about to have the dot-com boom. They had already ridden the 80s boom. We weren't in infinite wars in the Middle East. And he had just gotten finished with college. So I guess I can't exactly say that the boomers don't have good reason to be skeptical. But that being said, I find it a little hypocritical, because a lot of these people are like John Krakauer himself, you know? Well, you got to go to Everest. That must be nice, having a magazine pay $65,000 for one of the best guides on the planet to take your ass up to 29,000 feet. Must be nice. Gee, I sure wish I could get some of that going. I'm sure if I went to college for 900 years, I would have crippling debt, and there wouldn't be a job for me. And this isn't a pity party video. I'm just getting that out of the way. The story of Chris McCandless is honestly super astounding. Just his exploits are very quixotic almost in nature. Don Quixotean and Jack Londony. So it's entertaining in and of itself just to, I mean, and we're talking about a whole, maybe first half of the book, literally just dedicated to the things that he was doing, you know, wandering around the American Southwest, the Midwest, before he ended up going up into Alaska. I must also admit, he did make a lot of his gestures were kind of strange. The burning of the rest of his cash, the giving away of a very, very decent Datsun SUV. It's a little bit bizarre, so I guess I can understand why some people think that he was a little unhinged. But near the end of the book, the writer definitely does paint a sympathetic view of him, and definitely explains that, one, he was not an idiot. Two, he was doing pretty well. And then three, the reason that he died was not due completely to negligence, but just dumb luck, you know, poor luck. Near the end, there's actually a raging fucking debate as to what exactly killed him. And I feel like most YouTube videos don't even really talk about this. They always say he ate poison mushrooms. False. He did not eat poison mushrooms. He was subsiding most likely a wild game that he was catching with a 22 LR. I mean, the motherfucker brought down an actual moose with a 22 LR. And all of the Alaskan boomers were writing into these magazines and newspapers and publications saying, "Oh, there's no mooses in Alaska. Those are mostly native to the Canadian Rockies. That was probably a caribou. So dumb." Yeah, okay. And then John Krakauer got there, developed the roll of film, saw the rack on the fucking moose, and was like, okay, it's a moose. Sometimes animals, what if I told you, migrate? Brought down a bloody moose with a 22 LR. He was subsiding off of that and wild potatoes. But wild potatoes can only get eaten in certain months before they turn just hard and unedible. This is ancient Alaskan wisdom, but he started subsiding off of the seeds of those potatoes. And then there's this massive debate. Did the seeds poison him? And then they sent it in for toxicology, and it's like, no. Was it there a fungus living on the seeds that poisoned him? And that was part that pissed me off, because the person who suggested that theory read this guy's report in an Outside magazine, and he was like, he was an archivist or a librarian from like Omaha, and he's like, hey, I remember reading an article about a Nazi death camp where they were using that, like, seeds tainted with that fungus, and they were baking bread that way and feeding it to the prisoners, and a lethal neurotoxin within it was causing everyone to just lose the ability to walk and talk and eat. And that was how they were killing him, which is... and that was how weak McCandless was in the end, and that's what caused him not to be able to hike the 30 miles he would need to get to the interstate and out of the park, out of the Alaskan interior. But I think in the end they proved that to be false, but it did give the author, again, amazing detective skills, a good lead on what the actual cause was, and it turned out to be, yes, an amino acid in the seeds that had to have been building up within his system that was causing him to become malnourished due to malabsorption. He wasn't eating, whatever he was eating, he wasn't truly absorbing. But the thing that really pissed me off was that the people who wrote the article on the toxicology report for the first toxicology report Um, they they told the archivist basically STFU because Herder, you didn't go to college for toxicology. You're not a toxicologist. You don't know, And what? How much of a raging authority fallacy motherfucker do you have to be to? I forget the exact quote. I should have marked it, but it truly, truly pissed me off. And it literally was like, well, we literally can't prove you wrong, but fuck you. The book also has a lot of other information concerning the many faux pas that a lot of people in survival situations, specifically in Alaska, uh, end up making. It talks a lot about other survivalists or adventurers or tramps or whatever you want to call them, the mistakes that they made, the mysterious ways that they disappeared, all of which are really interesting and help bolster the narrative of Chris McCandless's Alexander Supertramp. And at the same time, it also includes a chapter about the main character's search for inner peace in a very, very, very similar and sympathetic way as Chris McCandless. He apparently went to go solo climb the Devil's Thumb, which is quite foolish. Much hubris, so foolish. Could have died well. It makes me think about my motivations for coming out to the wilderness a lot. It almost kind of put me off nature a little bit, you know what I mean? But there's a couple of revelations that I think have come from this, which is one, reading the reports of the way his family reacted to his death made me realize how my family might react to my death. And while I usually don't really care too much about my own safety, maybe it's something I, in the future, should consider. And in a very Taoist sense, I guess my dream, my fantasy of just one day disappearing like Bilbo Baggins, and I don't know half of you as much as I and then and just disappearing completely on a winding road adventure. But that's not realistic. It's not that it's not realistic. It's not sound. I feel like with my philosophy of dualism, I should have realized this before, that I should aim not to one day disappear completely, but instead to keep one foot in the real world and one foot out here. Anyway, anyone who's a fan of outdoors, anyone who's a fan of rock climbing, anyone who's a fan of hunting, survival, fuck, should definitely read this. This is one of the books that I think for people like me, and if you're like me, you just know it, that this is indispensable. You must read this. This is on Professor Tolstoy's reading list.